We're going to be starting cycle 4, and cycle 4 is all about applications. So we're really not learning anything new in this cycle. It's just taking things that we've already done and putting them into an application. This lesson is just going to be translating a sentence that is in words that involves math and changing it into an equation. And to be able to do that, you need to know the different words that are associated with the basic operations of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, and equals. So you can take a look through this list and we'll go through it as we go through the questions. So the first sentence says 7 fewer than a number is 11. What is the number? Anytime you are translating a sentence into a math equation, you need to make what is called a let statement. So you're basically picking a variable to represent what we don't know. So we don't know what the number is, so we're going to use x to represent what the number is. So 7 fewer than that number x is 11. So if you take a look at the word fewer, that is another word for subtraction. And it's 7 fewer than the number. So here's the number. And when you talk about something being fewer than, you are going to subtract it from that number. So it's x minus 7, not 7 minus x. Then it says is 11. So is represents where the equal sign goes. So that is equal to 11. So 7 fewer than a number. So I know that looks a little bit backwards, but whenever you say less than or fewer than or reduced by, things like that, it actually comes after the number. So 7 fewer than a number is 11. The next question says one number is 5 more than the other number. Their sum is 19. What are the numbers? So if x is one of the numbers, there's two numbers in this case, and one number is 5 more than the other. So if x is one of the numbers, that means x plus 5 has to be the other number because that's 5 more. Now, this is what you need to make the equation out of. Their sum is 19. So sum represents addition. So we're going to add them together. So the first number is x, and we're going to add it because it's the sum, and the second number is x plus 5, and then is, that's where your equal sign is going to be, and the sum is 19. So this is all we're doing today, is just making an equation out of a sentence. We're not going to be collecting like terms. We're not going to be solving the equation today. We'll do that starting the next time, but we're just going to be making the equations for now. Next one is Aaliyah had some candy to give to her 4 children. She took 10 pieces for herself and then evenly divided the rest among her children. Each child receives 2 pieces. How many pieces of candy did she start with? Now, whatever the question is, how many pieces of candy did she start with, that's what you should let the x be, because that's what we're solving for. That's what we don't know. So x is the number of candy she started with. So we're going to be starting with x. And it says she took 10 pieces for herself. So took is the same as take away. Right there. She took 10 pieces for herself. So that means she's going to take away 10 pieces and then evenly divided the rest among her children. So of course divided by is the division. So that's going to be divided by, and she has 4 children. So we're going to be dividing that by 4 And the result in this case is going to be that each child receives 2 pieces. So that's going to be equal to 2. Now, you're going to get some of these questions where it talks about the sum of 2 consecutive numbers is 291. Consecutive numbers are numbers that are one right after the other. So 5 and 6 are consecutive numbers. 10 and 11 are consecutive numbers. So what are the 2 numbers? So whenever you have the question, that's what your let statement is going to be. If there are 2 things you're solving for, like in this question, you were solving for 2 different numbers. In this question, we were only solving for 1 number. In this question, we were only solving for 1 number. This question, we're solving for 2 numbers. So we need a let and a then statement. So x is going to be the first number. And because they're consecutive, that means one right after the other, then x plus 1 would be the other number. Because to make it consecutive, you just have to add 1 to it. Once again, we're going to be solving for the sum. So we're going to be adding. So the first number is x. And we're going to be adding the next consecutive number, which is x plus 1. And the sum is, so that is our equals, 291. So keep that in mind for consecutive number questions. You're also going to get some questions about perimeter. The length of a rectangle is 3 less than double the width. The perimeter is 78. What are the dimensions? So that's our question. That's what we need to make as the let statement. A rectangle has 2 dimensions. So we have 2 things we have to solve for. So we need a let and a then statement. Now what you have to figure out, you've got length and width. Which one depends on the other? The length of a rectangle is 3 less than double the width. So the length depends on the width. So the independent value is going to be your let. So x is going to be the width in centimeters, include the units if needed. And the length is 3 less than, and of course less than is subtract, and it's going to be 3 less than double the width. So double is multiplication, which means times 2. So that's why it's equal to 2x minus 3 for the length. Because that gives us 3 less than double the width. Remember, whenever we do less than or fewer than or decreased by, it comes after. So that is the length. So if x is the width, the length is 3 less than double the width. Now to get the perimeter, you want to remember that the equation for the perimeter of a rectangle, you can write it as P is equal to 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. Or you can write it as 2 times bracket length plus the width. Either way is fine. So your first equation is going to be 2 times the length, which is 2 times 2x plus 3, plus 2 times the width, which is just 2x, and that is equal to the perimeter, which is 78. If you're using the other formula, it's 2 times bracket the length, which is 2x plus 3, plus the width, which is x, and that is equal to 78 as well. So either one of those would give you the correct answer. The last equation says Karen bought 8 toys. Some were dolls and some were cars. Dolls cost $12 and cars cost $5. She spent $61. How many dolls and cars did she buy? So this is one of the trickiest ones that you'll get. What you want to know is that in total there are 8 toys. Some of them are dolls and some of them are cars. And it says, how many dolls and cars did she buy? Now, the number of dolls does not depend on the number of cars. The number of cars does not depend on the number of dolls. So either one can be the let statement. So if we let X be the number of dolls she bought, you have to use this idea that she bought 8 toys. Because then if she bought 8 toys, to find the number of cars, you just take the number of dolls and subtract it from 8. So for example, if she bought 2 dolls, because there's 8 toys, she would have bought 6 cars. 8 minus 2 is 6. If she bought 5 dolls, then she would have bought 3 cars, because they have to add up to 8 toys. So if she bought 5 dolls, 8 minus 3 is 5, so that would be 8 minus 5 is 3, so that would be 3 cars. So whenever you have a question where you have 2 items and they add up to a certain value, your then statement is always the total number of items minus the number of the first item. And the way you make the formula for this is you take the value of the first item and multiply it by the number of the first item. And the value of the second item multiplied by the number of items of the second item, and that's going to equal the total cost. So it should kind of make sense if you look at it this way. Each doll costs $12. So you're going to take $12 and multiply it by how many dolls that you're buying. And in this case, we are buying X number of dolls. So we're going to take 12 dolls and multiply it by X. That's how much money you would spend on dolls. $12 times the number of dolls. And then we're going to add how much a car costs, which is value 2. So that is $5. And multiply it by how many cars. And that is the then part of the statement, which is 8 minus X. And then it's going to total the amount of money, which is $61. So try to think of this in a real world situation. If you're out shopping, you take how many dolls you have and you multiply it by the price of the doll, plus how many cars you have and multiply it by the price of a car, and that equals the total amount of money. And X is just the number of one item, and 8 minus X is the number of the second item, because there is a total of 8 items. So however many there are of the dolls, you subtract that from 8 to get the number of cars. Now, when we get into actually solving these problems, if you just answer this question and say there's, I don't know, whatever the answer is, there's 20 dolls and 41 cars. I'm not saying that's what the answer is, but if you just come up and say what the answer is, you're not going to get full marks. You're going to have to make the equation. You're going to have to make the let statements and the then statements eventually and solve the equation to get the answer. So that's what we're working on today, is just taking the sentence and changing it into an equation.